This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first, call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee with your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 an order. Additional terms apply.
We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to This Song Is Yours, a music podcast where we talk to a creative guest each week, talk about their life and their creative endeavours, and get them to talk about some of the music that they love. I'm your host Simon, and welcome to episode 1. We have a great guest today in the form of Eskimo Joe frontman Kav Temperley. How the show works is that we chat to our guests, but we also get them to make you a playlist, and we upload that to Spotify for you to listen to. You can find the link to our Spotify in the show notes. Our chat today covers everything from songwriting when drunk to how live music is going to look in a post-COVID-19 world. Here we go. Our guest today has one of the most distinctive voices in Australian music, is a multi-ARIA and Whammy Award winner, and has also taken home 3 international songwriting competition awards. He's a songwriting teacher, a podcaster, a solo artist, and the frontman for one of Australia's most loved bands. Please welcome to This Song Is Yours, the bassist and frontman of Eskimo Joe, Kav Temperley.
Hello, thanks for having us, Simon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in my studio in Fremantle, and I'm in the less romantic location of the control room, which kind of looks like the inside of the Millennium Falcon before the cleaners have come through. I've got a great little space down in Freo that I share with a bunch of different people, and it allows me to, work on a bunch of projects like, Eskimo Joe, to my own stuff, to, education stuff, to songwriting with people and everything in between.
I was going to ask how your songwriting methods have changed during these times. I know you've recently taken to songwriting online. How have you found that?
Well, I mean, songwriting's a funny thing. Like if you're in a room with people, then and the idea, starts to feel exciting and, take up momentum and all the rest of it, then the heat in the room starts to kind of rise and everyone gets excited. Since the COVID things happened, from professional songwriting sessions to education stuff, I've been doing everything online. And, the downside of that is it's just, you can't jam real time. You can't be like, I'll play some chords and you sing. You have to kind of get into this new way of doing it, which is, everyone has 5 minutes to kind of do their idea and then you've got to consider it and go on. But it's also been a time of great innovation. For instance, I'm doing a online songwriting course called Kav's Virtual Songwriting. And we've got kids from all over Australia. So we've got a kid in Tasmania and a kid in Melbourne, a kid in Perth, and these guys, what I do is I put them all into bands and I go through this process, which I normally do in a day, but because it's, these Zoom chats, we do them in little kind of hour chunks, and I put together a lecture and I send out the lecture, and then we sit down and we slowly work through this process of finishing a song. And it's been really interesting. Like there's been parts of it that have been really great and parts of it that have been really frustrating. There's definitely no real time, reaction stuff that happens in the same way like you do in a room. But I would have never have gone, yeah, cool, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and do an online songwriting course. But like I said, there's like a kid in Melbourne who's been in lockdown for, months now. And then there's a kid in Tasmania who's, kind of out, but like totally isolated to the rest of the world. And then there's a kid in Perth who nothing much has changed for them. And they're all communicating together and writing a song. And I think that's pretty magical. And that's just, been out of necessity of where we're at in the world.
I was going to ask, given the current circumstances of what's happening in the world, previously you would have had to have travelled to complete these songs. Do you think the situation has forced the hands of artists on how they create?
Yeah, look, I think it's just made people have to just get on with it. Everyone's got a new normal. I remember being suggested of doing online songwriting sessions with people, and I'm like, nah, it's a terrible idea. I'll just wait till I'm in town, and we'll write a bunch of songs. And I've always done it like that, but now we just have to, because it's the only way we can write with each other, and it's working. People are just kind of getting on with it and going, like I said, this is the new normal way that people write and do stuff together. And I don't think artists, there's not really any excuse for a lazy artist. As a songwriter or any kind of creator, we have to work 500 times harder than anyone who has a check in, check out job, because we are responsible for what we put out, and that's a lot of work for some people. But we're also kind of, as artists, we classically just want to go into our shell and create our ideas, and we famously don't really want to put ourselves out there. And I think what this whole COVID online writing thing is doing is forcing us to actually put ourselves out there a bit more, and I think that's healthy. I think collaboration is a key part of creativity and coming together. Like there's that famous quote, I don't even know who said it, I should probably find this out, but art doesn't exist in a vacuum. You need a microcosm of all this stuff going on for art to come together. And I think doing these online chats like we're doing right now, it's forcing people into this microcosm.
Earlier in the year, you launched a podcast entitled Hat Jam, where it focused on the art and pressures of songwriting. Were those episodes done remotely?
We did one remote one, which was with Dallas Frasca, and she was a champion, because it's a lot of work, as putting a podcast together. I'm sure one day they'll work out how to make money out of them. But at the moment, you just have all these passionate individuals like you and I, putting together these really interesting things that people love to consume. So with the Hat Jam podcast, it was a lot about me traveling to people's jam rooms, to their sacred space where they create music. And we did most of them. I traveled all over the world to do a bunch of to what ended up being series 1 of Hat Jam. But the final one we did as a COVID special, and that required the artist, which was Dallas Frasca, to do a lot of the work at her end. But what we do in Hat Jam is we sit down. We play this game that I've invented called Hat Jam, and we literally pull names out of a hat, and we have to write a song in real time. And then by the end of the episode, which is recorded over a 5-hour period, but I edit it down to about 45 minutes to an hour. By the end of it, they've recorded a version of the song that they would be happy to put out. So with the long distance writing thing, that took a few more days than would do if I was just in a room with someone going, yeah, cool, let's record this now.
Can we expect a season 2?
Hell yeah. There's actually a lot of great artists in Western Australia at the moment, which is where I live, who have all finally made their way back home. So, you've got people like, John Butler, Stella Donnelly, the guys from San Cisco, to name a few. And they're just great higher caliber bands who are out there. We'll put out some records now. So I'm hoping to get some of those guys on board. I think one of the, there's a lot of positivity about how artists have reacted to the COVID times, but there's also a lot of kind of dragging of feet that have happened in the COVID times. I think a lot of people have been like, oh, sweet, you mean I don't have to get on a plane in 2 weeks and go and play a show? So, I think in Western Australia, which is such a kind of haven, everyone's been a little bit slow off the mark, but I hope to, as soon as the borders open as well, get out. And, I had a whole bunch of artists lined up, but for season 1 that I didn't get round to because it all shut down, but I'm sure they'll all be happy to jump back on once we get out and do season 2.
That sounds very exciting. As you mentioned, with the borders still being closed and with COVID-19, how do you think it's going to affect both releasing and touring music moving forward?
Well, it's a funny thing, because we got to this point just before the world shut down where people seem to accept that, you could spend $50,000, which is not a small amount of money, on an album and we would accept that that album wasn't going to sell. It was just going to get streamed on the streaming service, and you might make $1.50 out of that. But people were still going out and playing shows, and that became the main income source. And now that everything's shut down, people are still trying to make these artisan records. These high quality, amazing albums. Some great records have come out through this time, most of them recorded before the lockdown happened. But no one can go out and sell their wares in the same way. But what has happened is music as a commodity has come back up a bit. And I think that's pretty magical. There was a point, towards the late 2000s, it started to kick in where, if a bunch of people were walking along the street and walked into a bar, they'd be like, ooh, a live band's playing. Let's go somewhere else and we'll come back when that's finished, and the DJ's on. Now, everyone from my friends who play in bands, who the last thing they want to do when they get back from tour is go out and see a band because they've just been on the road, to anyone down the road are starved for it. In Western Australia, where the restrictions are basically completely lifted. I've done a few solo shows. I'm about to do a few more. Man, people love it. It just goes to show that you take this one thing away, which is, going to a live show and feeling, these emotions that you only feel when a great artist sings a beautiful song live in front of you. You take that away from them, and suddenly everyone's like, hold on, I need this in my life, And so I'm feeling like, music as a commodity is coming back up again. And hopefully that plays back into this thing of people trying to make great albums and people, wanting to support these artists.
I feel like it's a shared experience that you can't really recreate any other way.
No. We're about to do our first COVID-friendly festival, and it looks insane. It's like 4 sections that everyone gets to go into, and it's like ample space with like no lines for toilets, and because that's not cool for the COVID thing. And
is this the revolving stage?
Yeah. And there's a revolving stage. But they didn't tell us about the revolving stage until after they booked us for the show, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's a revolving stage." And I'm like, I hope no one gets seasick halfway through. But yeah, I imagine it's just gonna slowly turn around from section to section. So that's gonna be trippy.
Is it a thing where each quarter or section gets one song and then the stage continues to move around?
I think, but it's in the round, so the PA will be going out equally to each section. But I think slowly this stage turns. So, for a moment you'll kind of like you said, for half a song you'll get the front of the band, and then you'll get the side of the band, and then the back of the band, and there's all kinds of interesting things going on all over the stage. So, in the round.
To be honest, it sounds kind of wild.
The classic thing is it sounds slightly wild, but it's an acoustic festival in the southwest of Western Australia. So we got called on. We weren't originally booked for it, but we had to replace a good friend of ours, Josh Pike, who couldn't travel. So it's Xavier Rudd, John Butler, us, and we're a high octane rock and roll band. I mean, I don't know if this podcast is going visual as well, but you can see the black fingernails slowly peeling off my fingernails there. That's the kind of band we are, Simon. But so we'll be getting up and doing an acoustic version of our show to kind of fit in with the vibe. So for a wild revolving stage, it's going to be a pretty chilled affair.
It wouldn't be the first time you guys have experimented with your sound, though. Last year, Eskimo Joe released a live record with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, you asked me to send through a playlist of some songs, and I included a song from the West Australian Symphony Orchestra show that we did. We did a bunch of them around the country, but the ones at the Perth Concert Hall with Wazzo were the first 2 shows we did, and they were just absolutely magical. Yeah.
Is it something where you've gone, I've always wanted to know what From the Sea would sound like with a 30-piece orchestra?
I think it's every musician's bucket list to have all of their songs, that they humbly wrote in their bedrooms, reinterpreted by an orchestra. But it came about slightly organically. I mean, we had just kind of finished touring Wastelands, which was the last record we put out. It was about 2014. And we sat down and, the plan was always just for us all to step away and do some other projects in our life and for a little while, but not to finish playing with Eskimo Joe, just to kind of have a bit of a, make it not our full-time job for a while. And we said, well, what do we want to do? What's the plan? And it was always floated that we would come back and, as one of our first big shows back would be to do a symphony orchestra show. And then it just happened that I went to, see a friend play who was playing with the symphony orchestra, and I met the lady who's brand new at her job, Natalie something or other. Sorry, Natalie, I can't remember your last name. But she said, oh my God, could we get Eskimo Joe to do this? And I was like, yes, you can. So that took about 2 years in the planning. And by the time, that had come around, it was the perfect timing for us to kind of enter stage right again with the band. And it was really the catalyst that got us excited about being in Eskimo Joe again. So it was just perfect timing.
You guys did return this year with the single Say Something. Personally, when I listen back to previous Eskimo Joe, it sounds like there was a concentrated effort to make each record sonically different from the last. Like Girl is a little bit more indie rock, and A Song as a City is more indie pop. Black Fingernails Red Wine is more stadium rock. Is there a conscious effort from yourselves when making a new record to evolve from the previous sound?
Yeah, we grew up being big Beatles fans, and loved how they approach songwriting. They, every song was an event for those guys, but every album was an event as well. And they seem to consciously want to change things up and keep moving forward all the time. And I think with Eskimo Joe, that was always our plan, was never to write the same song twice and never to make the same record twice. But the interesting thing is when we sat down to do Say Something, I mean, we had just re-released all of our back catalogue, and when you make a record, it's not often that you go back and listen to that record again. Like you said, you're kind of thinking about the new sound, what are we doing next, how can we make the new sound, and so we spent a lot of time doing that, but not going back and listening to our records and high-fiving each other going, what a great record, so leading up to Say Something, we've been going through all of our old demos and going through, the remastering stuff for vinyl. And it was the first time, and then we got the vinyl, but it was the first time I'd really sat down and listened to those records again. And you have so much baggage attached to records when you've just made them. You're like, oh my God, that story, that's still too raw for me. Or, oh, I don't like how I sung that vocal, or we could have written that song better. You have so much attached to it, but you have to let it go because the album's out. But it was the first time I went back and just listened to them and was just listened, didn't have any baggage, didn't have any judgment. I was like, yeah, and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, these are, going back to albums like Girl, where we were, 20 years old. It was just really fun and lots of joy and lots of just happy memories and no cringe moments where I'm like, oh, I can sing much better now or whatever. I just listened. And so when we sat down to write Say Something, we kind of, all of those, flavors and those eras of Eskimo Joe were kind of floating around our brains. And so we really sat down and wrote a song that was kind of inspired by who we were, which was just probably a really positive step back into the spotlight again, I think.
And when you do listen back, is there anything that jumps back out and finds its way into a new song and you think, oh gosh, 20 years on, I didn't think I'd still be singing about that?
I relive all of these stories every time I sing them on stage, and I always sound like the whinging lead singer to my bandmates because they're just like, whatever. But for me, I have to relive those stories, otherwise emotionally they lose their potency. So I come off stage and sometimes I'm really exhausted because I've had to relive, it's not like you are as attached to the actual storyline, but there's an emotion and a growing, a period of growth as you write about these things in your life. That's what's so magical about being a songwriter. You don't often have to go to therapy because you're writing all these demons out of you all the time. But you have to relive the essence of what that experience was every time you sing it on stage. And so, I'm pretty aware and comfortable with all the subject matter of everything that I sung about. But I guess, it's the voice is such a raw instrument that it's quite interesting for me to go back and listen to me as a 20-year-old compared to me as a 40-year-old. You know, I'm really comfortable with my voice now as a singer, but to listen to me singing when I'm 20, I'm like, oh my God, you sound like a child. Yes, because you were a child.
Look, I think that's very fair. In 2018, you released your first solo record called All Your Devotion. When writing the songs, what stood out from these songs that they weren't Eskimo Joe songs, but Kav Temperley solo artist songs?
I think it's a great question because, you know, in this era where we're back to just writing singles, I think there is something about the process of writing an album where you don't often know what you're writing about or what the essence of the idea is until you go deep into it. And the only way to do that is to create a whole project, i.e. a record. And when I was writing All Your Devotion, I'd already put out an EP, and there was like moments on that EP where I was like, oh, that's cool. That's going to be my solo sound. But it was only through doing the record that I really got to discover who I was as a solo artist. You know, everyone who's been in a band can relate to this idea that, you know, where you think as you write an idea and then it gets workshopped as a band and turned into the sound of the sum of its parts. You know, there's always an idea in the back of your head of like, well, what would it sound like if I just followed my one idea through? And I guess doing a solo record is you get a pretty good idea of what it would sound like. And, you know, you kind of hark back to all of your favorite eras sonically. I mean, I always like music to not sound.
Did you know 1 in 2 women wear the wrong foundation? Matching foundation is hard, but Il Maquillage makes it easy. Take the Power Match quiz to find a better match in seconds, customized for your unique skin tone, undertone, and coverage needs. With 600,000 5-star reviews, this best-selling foundation is going viral for a reason. Available in 50 shades of weightless natural coverage. And with Try Before You Buy, you can try your full size at home for 14 days. Just pay shipping. Take the quiz at ilmaquillage.com/quiz. That's ILMAKIAGE.com/quiz.
This summer, Instacart presents famous summer flavors coming to your front door. Or pool. Or hotel.
Your grocery delivery has arrived, sir.
That was faster than room service.
No violins in the lobby.
Oh, seriously? Anyway, sit back, relax, and get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes. Starring your favorite snacks, drinks, and more. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Rated H for hungry audiences. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
When I make music, I don't want it to sound too retro, but for me, you know, there was a lot of references to the kind of early 70s Neil Young kind of psychedelic-y era of that kind of time. But yes, but as far as the songs go, you know, it was less about going for the jugular, you know, and making people want to sing along, and more about creating an experience emotionally for, you know, who I am. And when you do a solo show compared to doing a band show, you know, a band show is like a spruiker in a marketplace. You're like, you know, come and buy my apples, they're amazing, come and buy my apples. You know, you're trying to sell your wares on this large stage, and you're throwing these big shapes, and it's all very kind of theatrical like that. Whereas when you do a solo show, you know, you can actually take your time to tell a story and engage people in that way. And I felt like doing the solo album was a lot like that too. I didn't feel like I had to get straight to the hooks every single time. I could actually tell it in a bit more of a subtle, raw way. And I mean, I really look forward to getting in and doing some more recording and building on what I did in that on that record. I mean, I'm really proud of it sonically and songwriting wise, and I can't wait to kind of see where I go next with, you know, that experience.
You mentioned a second ago how the industry is focusing more on big singles and less long-form records. And with the release format shifting to a model like that, do you find yourself leaning more towards sporadically releasing songs? Or do you think full records still have their place?
It's hard to say. I mean, for me, I still love listening to records. I love it when people, like I said, have gone deep into an idea. One of the songs I put on the playlist I sent to you is by a guy called Andy Schauf, and he's a Canadian guy. I love the sonics of his record, but this particular album that he's just put out is his second record. And if you listen to it, if you go a little bit deeper into it, it's like one storyline that runs through the whole entire record, and about this girl coming back to town, and they haven't seen each other in years, and then they finally kind of get together. And then on the like second last track, which is Fire Truck, which is the song I put on the playlist and sent you, you finally get to the depth of the story about why they kind of had a falling out, you know. And it's I just love that, you know. I love the idea that you can go deep into pop music, you know, which is essentially what it is. You know, you can wrap it up and call it pop rock or indie this or that. It's just pop music, you know, and in varying degrees. And I think, you know, in this country, 90% of our funding goes towards operas and ballet. And, you know, say what you will about it being classic or whatever, but the one thing that opera and ballet does that deserves a bit of money is their grand ideas. You know, they're not just like, oh yeah, here's a dance move, you know, I'm going to put out one dance move a month. It's like, this is a developed, thought about idea. And I think in records, you get to go into that. And I feel like maybe if the funding was there, or maybe if the kudos was there, people would feel a little bit more, you know, liberated about, you know, going deeper into an idea. And I'm not saying everyone should be putting out double records. I still think an album should just be like, you press play and from start to finish, you know what song's coming next, and it's taking you on a journey. And like a good book, it's got a beginning, middle, and end. I love that about a record. And I want it to keep my interest the whole time, and I want it to have challenging moments that I don't get straight away. But when I listen to a few more times, it reveals itself. You know, I love all of that stuff. So I'll still listen to records forever, and I can't speak for anybody else, but that's my experience with it.
Did any of that come into play when the band made the decision to reissue all the old albums on vinyl, so that people had to sit down and listen to the piece as a whole?
Yes, I mean, every time we made a record, we tried to do this idea of. I still think the format of vinyl is the ultimate way to consume a record. 20 minutes aside, you have to flip it and dip it, and that moment you can get yourself a cup of coffee or whatever. And and great records always have like a hit at the beginning of side one and a hit at the beginning of side two. I love how vinyl works like that. The funny thing about re-releasing all the back catalogue is we had this hard drive of like everything, and Stu from the band, his job was to go through and pull out all of these old demos. And we did a bunch of shows with Jimmy Barnes with Eskimo Joe, and which was great because Jimmy Barnes is a legend. And
it's Jimmy Barnes.
It's Jimmy Barnes. And we were up in Cairns or somewhere, and Stu was like, "Oh, listen to this song, I love this." And it was like a B-side that never made it on the record, but Stu's always held a candle for this song. He's like, "I love this song," and we kept listening. And this next song came on, and I was like, "What?" And so Stu had gone in. It was never a demo. It was literally me coming home drunk late one night and pressing record. And you can hear like the idea starts. I'm like, yeah, that sounds solid. And then like by the second verse, that clearly I was, kind of making it up on the spot. I'm slurring and going through it. I'm like, how did that make it onto the B-sides? And Stu was like, to tell you the truth, I just listened to the first like 30 seconds. I was like, yeah, that sounds great, and chucked it on there. So, unfortunately now that will never get developed into a song. Or maybe it will. Maybe we should take that B-side out and turn it into a new Eskimo Joe song. But hilariously, yes, you got to be careful about who goes through the demos, because some things aren't demos. They're literally just Kav drunk late at night.
I love that you can hear where like there was the sound of mind in creating the song, and then when the wheels fall off, it's just they're off.
Totally. And I'm starting to slur halfway through the song. It's really funny. But the song's cool. I was listening to it. I was like, that's a cool idea. Shame I didn't turn that into a proper song.
You could probably still turn it around at some point.
There's still time, Simon.
Awesome. Let's talk about your playlist.
Great.
You sent through, Kav, I can see some Eskimo Joe, some Bob Evans, some Josh Pike, and Steve Parkin as well. All of those gents make up Basement Birds, which you're included on the playlist as well. Are you guys all still in touch?
Look, I would love to do another Basement Birds record, but it's one of those things. It was a miracle that our stars aligned, and we had 8 months that we literally wrote, recorded, and toured that record, and then everyone was back doing their day jobs. I still, see Kev, aka Bob Evans, around quite a bit. He was one of the guests on my Hat Jam podcast. Me and Josh are really close. I stay with him every time he goes to Sydney, and he comes and hangs out with me every time he comes to Perth, and we chat regularly on the phone. Steve, I'm still in contact with. He's kind of, just chilling out in the burbs at the moment, but still making music and all the rest of it. Everyone's still creatively doing their thing. I think it's about 10 years since that record came out, but it was such an awesome experience doing that record, and shame we never got to do another one.
The song that you picked from the Basement Birds record was Ghosts. What is it about that song that made it stand out from the other songs on that record?
I think back to a conversation that me and Kev had, and when we were putting the track listing together, he was like, I think it should open with Ghosts. And I was like, no, it's got to be the single, and it's got to, I was all pop about it. And then after we put the record out, I rang up Kev and said, you were right. We should have put that as the first song on the record. And he was like, he was so upset. But there's, we wrote that record. A bunch of it was written on the back porch of my house, and then we were literally recording the songs in the back shed of my house, that afternoon. That song was one of the first songs that me and Josh wrote. I think we wrote 2 songs in one session, got ourselves a bottle of whiskey and just sat in my jam room and went for it. And Ghosts just, it was very fluid how that song came together, and I think it's still probably one of my favourite moments on the record.
Another song you've picked is Cash Machine by Oliver Tree, which gives me some very serious Eskimo Joe wake-up vibes. Oliver Tree, along with some other acts you've picked, including Gum and Tame Impala, are known for blending genres. Do you think that's become more common within the last 4 to 5 years, where acts have found that, you can be a little bit electro and a little bit country all in the same song, and it works when you put it together?
Yeah, I think that's where we're at in music at the moment. there's when no one's coming up with a brand new thing, like no insult to the bands. I mean, I think good songs and as long as you press play and you're like, this is cool, then it's cool. Tame Impala, Gum, Oliver Tree, it's like a really good representation of where music's at the moment. And I thought that was a good song to put on here on the playlist because it's a brand new song, and it did the same thing to me that it did to you, Simon, when I first heard it, which was it just took me back to a place straight away, and it was like that kind of slacker, early noughties kind of vibe, but it's still really modern. It's got this whole section where it all goes kind of and dancey and stuff like that. But yeah, something was really nostalgic about that song and just really instant. I was like, oh yeah, I know this music. I could write this music. This is the music we were writing, when we were 20 years old, and how cool.
I thought it honestly might have been a B-side from Girl, or maybe a drunk voice memo from yourself.
Well, I showed it to Joel from Eskies, and he hadn't heard it yet, and he was just like, because he spends a lot of time living in Melbourne and producing a lot of other bands, and he straight away was like messaging his producer mates going, oh, you should hear this song, this is a cool idea, So I think Oliver Tree is kind of, people just, they do a certain thing at a certain time, and if they had done it 5-10 years earlier, we might not have paid attention. I feel like Tame Impala is a similar band. Amazing, like super cool production. Kev from Tame Impala is just an absolute champion, doing some of the coolest shit in the world, and the whole entire world's paying attention. So that he's from Fremantle, so that makes me proud. But I feel like he came along at the right time when people were ready to hear that music. And if it had been, 5 years shy of that, people, it might have just been too indie or just the wrong music at the wrong time.
One song that you picked that surprised me was Simmer by Hayley Williams. Are you a fan of Paramore? And what was it about this song that stood out?
Well, the answer is I've never been a fan of Paramore. In fact, it's like if people put Paramore on, I'd probably like roll my eyes a little bit. And that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer to music. If you enjoy it, then it's good for you. But I've never been a Paramore fan. And so I was pleasantly surprised when I heard this. And I feel like people need to pay attention to what artists do there's more dimensions to a lot of artists, and I feel like she is flexing that muscle here. If you listen to the song, the production's really cool. You know, you put it on, if you were like going to the gym or whatever and you were like an indie kid, you were like, this is the kind of song you'd want to pump weights to. It's super cool, and it's dense and it's interesting, and it shows that, you know, there's a bit more going on behind the coloured hair dye and the Paramore facade than we thought was there.
Yeah, it's actually quite a great record.
I had to listen to the record, and it's super, got lots of experimental stuff going on it. You know, she's obviously trying to be, quote unquote, an artist. And I think, you know, when we were talking about albums and singles, singles are such an important part of what we do. You know, they're not better or worse than the other songs on the record, but you need that hook to pull people in to see what else is going on, you know, and she's done that really successfully. You can clearly see that she's worked in a big, successful band for years, because she puts a song like that on the record and it brings a whole lot of people in to listen to all the other interesting, you know, kookiness that's going on her record.
The last song I wanted to talk to you about today, Kav, is one from one of my personal favourite artists, Father John Misty, one of the greatest troubadours or singer-songwriters of the last 10 years. You've picked the most recent single, 2S. What attracted you to this song?
Well, it's a brand new song for him, and I'm a big believer in continuing to work that musical muscle where you actually pay attention to what artists are doing right now. Like, I love Father John Misty. I probably listen to Fear of Fun more than any of his other records, because there's a couple of tracks on that I love. But I love tracks off every record he puts out. But as an artist, I think he's just a really vital character. You know, he's got this kind of nihilistic thing going on, but he gets it. It's clearly a bit of an act at the same time, but there's a blurred line with him, you know, like there's a bit of a tragic comedic aspect to what he does. But
yeah, I think he knows it's an act, but he loves the act of it itself.
It's clearly an extension of who he is. And, you know, his background, like he was the drummer in
in Fleet Foxes,
you know, who are another amazing band. You know, if you check out the Live at the Basement sessions that Nigel Godrich does, that, you know, Radiohead has done, and PJ Harvey, and lots of amazing bands. And there's a session of Fleet Foxes doing it, and yes, Josh Tillerman is on the drums, and he put out quite a few records as Josh Tillerman, and no one really cared. But it wasn't until he stepped into this, like, I don't care about life, whatever, you know, thing, that suddenly everyone paid attention. And that was his third record, you know. So clearly he's a prolific guy who's going to keep making records. And he became a lot bigger than the Fleet Foxes have, I think. And he will definitely continue to do interesting stuff. So that's why I put one of his new songs on there, because it's a really cool, interesting song, beautiful chords, amazing string arrangements and stuff going on. But yeah, it's someone to continue to pay attention to, I say.
I think that's a great pick, and what a song to end the episode on. Kav, thank you so much for your time today, and for being our guest.
Absolute pleasure, Simon. Looking forward to hearing the podcast when it's out there on the airwaves doing what podcasts do. Cheers.
And that's our show. We want to say a massive thank you to Kav and the Eskimo Joe team. Their latest single, Say Something, is out now and available to stream on all music platforms. If you'd like to see the full list of Kav's songs, you can find the link to This Song Is Yours Spotify profile in the show notes of this pod. We'd also like to thank Dan and the team at Lip Media for their guidance with setting up the podcast. We're not a Lip Media show, but please make sure you check out and listen to some of the great and diverse content they have. Speaking of content, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you like the show, you can follow us on Instagram or on Facebook. I've been your host, Simon Fink, and we'll be back with another show next week. Until then.
This podcast is brought to you by eHarmony, the dating app to find someone you can be yourself with. Why doesn't eHarmony allow copy and paste in first messages? Because you are unique, and your conversations should reflect that. eHarmony wants you to find someone who will get you. How are you going to know who gets you? If people send you the same generic conversation starters they message everyone else. Conversations that actually help you get to know each other. Imagine that. Get who gets you on eHarmony. Sign up today.